Thanks for joining me for question 58 of the Summa Theologica, and this is on the Mode of Angelic Knowledge. There are 7 articles in this particular question, so it is pretty long. In fact, I recorded this one time and it went way too long, so I'm going to give you kind of a abbreviated version of these because I know that your time is valuable and you don't have all day to watch these videos, and so I'm trying to keep it as short as possible. And this, by the way, is really kind of a hodgepodge. It has a lot of different aspects and questions related to angelic epistemology, angelic knowledge. And the last 2 articles of this question have to do what's called the morning and the evening knowledge of the angels. And if you've ever heard of this, this is something that came from St. Augustine. And it's really interesting, differentiating between the morning and the evening knowledge. So that's coming up. And also he's going to ask about whether the angels can know a lot of things at the same time, which is kind of a foreshadowing of our experience in heaven when our knowledge will be enhanced in our ability to know things. And so there are some rather interesting questions that he asks in these articles of this particular question 58. All right, so Article 1 says whether the angel's intellect is sometimes in potentiality and sometimes in act. Now, I have mentioned a few times before that Thomas is giving us a lot of foreshadowing of the treatise on human nature, which is coming up. And even though we haven't really gotten into human nature yet, he's told us a lot about it. And so really, when we talk about, intellects being a potentiality and an act, that has nothing to do with God, because God is pure act. He has no potentiality at all. Human beings, we have a lot of potentiality and also action as well in our intellect. When it comes to the angels, it's really seen in 2 different ways. In one way, since they have infused knowledge that comes to them at the moment of their creation, there's no potentiality in that. But then at the same time, our guardian angel doesn't know what we're going to have for breakfast tomorrow morning or what we're, where we're going to drive tomorrow evening. It doesn't know the future, as we've learned. So there has to be some potentiality. And so I'm just going to read this one brief paragraph here for this. As the philosopher states, and of course that means Aristotle, the intellect is in potentiality in 2 ways. First, as before learning or discovering. Okay, so there's really no before learning and learning because everything is infused and it just happens. Okay, so the moment they're created, they have all this knowledge infused into them. So before that, they didn't exist, right? That is, before it has the habit of knowledge. Secondly, as when it possesses the habit of knowledge but does not actually consider in the first way. An angel's intellect is never in potentiality with regard to the things to which his natural knowledge extends. Okay? And then he says, the angels have no intelligible potentiality which is not fully completed by connatural intelligible species. This is just a fancy way of saying that when they're created, the intelligible species of everything that they're going to know naturally is infused in them, and so there is no potentiality. But with regard to things divinely revealed to them, there is nothing to hinder them from being in potentiality. All right, so it's kind of yes and no. They do have some potentiality, but in some regard, there is no potentiality. All right, Article 2, whether an angel can understand many things at the same time. Now, we have what's called discursive intellect, reason, which we'll get into. I'm getting ahead of myself because that'll be Article number 3. So let me just read this. Can an angel understand many things at the same time? Now, it happens that several things may be taken as several or as one, like the parts of a continuous whole. I mentioned before about a house, how we can think of a house and all the different parts as one continuous whole, even though it has various parts, but we're seeing it all as one. Okay, for in each of the parts, if each of the parts be considered severally, they are many. Consequently, neither by sense nor by intellect are they grasped by one operation nor all at once. In another way, they are taken as forming one in the whole, and so they are grasped both by sense and intellect all at once and by one operation. Okay, as long as the entire continuous whole is considered. In this way, our intellect understands Now, this is interesting because he's now comparing it to human epistemology. In this way, our intellect understands together both the subject and the predicate as forming parts of one proposition. So if I were to say, the man runs, or the woman speaks, okay, that has subject and action, subject and predicate, but we see it as one thing, right? We don't separate the man and the walking. We just see a man walking, and it's one thing altogether, right? So and also two things compared together, according as they agree in one point of comparison. Okay, so trying to think of an example of this, I don't know, maybe two fish or two pieces of fruit, or comparing the size of an apple and an orange. You can think of them kind of at the same time because you're comparing two things that are similar in a sense. I think that's what he's getting at here. From this, it is evident that many things, as so far as they are distinct, cannot be understood at once, but insofar as they are comprised under one intelligible concept. Okay, so angels are able to know things under these concepts, these intelligible species together, again, like the house, if that example helped. Okay, is an angel's knowledge discursive? And he says here, the human intellect obtains their perfection in the knowledge of a truth by a kind of movement and discursive intellectual operation. That is to say, as they advance from one thing to another, advance from one known thing to another. Now, I put this, kid, working on the chalkboard, doing math problems, because you might have remembered as you did your multiplication tables, you learned that 8 times 2 is 16 and 8 times 3 is 24, but you learned these separately. You didn't know it all at the same time. You had to learn one, memorize it, learn the next one, learn these principles. That's discursiveness, okay? But if from the knowledge of a known principle they were straightway to perceive as known all in its consequent conclusions, then there would be no discursive process at all. Such is the condition of the angels, because in the truths which they know naturally, they at once behold all things whatsoever that can be known in them. And so going back to the math table, if you are looking at all the things that can be multiplied by 8, and you learn them one by one, the angel in that case would just know them all. Okay, it would have that knowledge at the moment it's created, and it wouldn't have to go to school and learn those kind of things. So that is the difference. Whether an angel understands by composing and dividing. Now, this is very much related to this, and it has to do with our mind. Kind of goes from one thing to the next. It says, in the intellect composing and dividing, the predicate is compared with the subject. For if our intellect were to see at once the truth of the conclusion in the principle, it would never understand by discursion and reasoning. In like manner, if the intellect, in apprehending the quiddity of the subject, were at once to have knowledge of all that can be attributed to or removed from the subject, it would never understand by composing and dividing, but only by understanding the essence. One example in my life is I love snakes. I study snakes, I catch snakes, and I've been doing that since I was 10 years old. But through my life, I've learned different things. Which are the venomous snakes of North America? How do you identify them? How do you know if a water snake compared to a cottonmouth? Well, I've learned those things. Okay, an angel would just have all that knowledge already. It wouldn't have to learn it. It's not discursive. It's not composing and dividing and learning one thing after the next. And so that is the difference between us and the angels. All right, article number 3 says whether there can be falsehood in the intellect of an angel. Now, this is one that can get very, very long in detail, but I'm going to try to explain this as quickly as possible. It says an angel understands not by composing and dividing, but by understanding what a thing is. Okay, as we already explained. Now, the intellect is always true as regard what a thing is, just as the sense regarding its proper object. But by accident, deception and falsehood creep in when we understand the essence of a thing by some kind of composition, and this happens either when we take the definition of one thing for another, or when the parts of a definition do not hang together, as if we were to accept the definition of some creature as a 4-footed flying beast. Okay, so this is where we can We can understand four-footed creatures, cows and cats and dogs, and we can understand a flying beast like an owl or a crow. And then in our mind, even though both of those are true, we combine them and we create something in our mind that doesn't exist, that has falsity, right? And so, let's see. So therefore, no falsehood, error, or deception can exist of itself in the mind of any angel. Yet it does so happen accidentally, but very differently from the way it befalls us. For we sometimes get at the quiddity, that's what it is, of a thing by composing and dividing process. As when by division and demonstration we seek out the truth of a definition, such is not the method of the angels, but through the knowledge of the essence of a thing, they know everything that can be said regarding it. And he also, I won't read this part, but he also makes a distinction between the blessed angels and the damned angels. And the damned angels, through their own malice and their bad will often kind of make errors in intelligent, definitions that the blessed angel wouldn't do. Okay, so that's kind of a complicated one, but hopefully that makes sense. All right, so now we have gotten to this Article 6, and this is morning and evening knowledge in the angels. And the corpus for this Article 6 is pretty short, so I'm going to read the whole thing because I think it's really interesting. The expression morning and evening knowledge was derived by Augustine, who interprets the 6 days wherein God made all things, not as ordinary days measured by the solar circuit, since the sun was only made on the 4th day, but as one day, namely the day of angelic knowledge, as directed to 6 classes of things. Now that's interesting, okay? There's some debate about what exactly happened in those 6 days, and that's how St. Augustine weighs in. As in the ordinary day, morning is the beginning and evening the close of day. So the knowledge of the primordial being of things is called morning knowledge. Now, what I take this to mean is that God has the form of all things in his mind. Okay, so he knows dogness and catness and pigness, right? So that's morning knowledge of the angels. Okay, they know it exists. Okay, that's how I take it. Tell me if you think otherwise. And this is according to as things exist in the Word. Okay, remember this is going back to Trinitarian, theology and the generation of the second person of the Blessed Trinity by the principle, right? But their knowledge of the very being of the thing created, as it stands as its own nature, is termed evening knowledge. Okay, now you have creation. This is where it's not just in the mind of God, but it's actually created. And so those forms are actually substantiated in matter, and now you have creation. The angels know those as well. Because the being of things flows from the Word as from a kind of primordial principle, and this flow is terminated in the being which they have in themselves. Okay, morning and evening knowledge of the angels. Finally, article number 7 says whether the morning and evening knowledge are one. Okay, so like if they're one, why do you have to have two different things? Okay, are they basically the same thing? Isn't this a beautiful picture, by the way? Isn't that just absolutely gorgeous? Absolutely gorgeous. Now, they know this, the angels know this through a twofold medium, namely by innate ideas, infused ideas, or by the forms of things existing in the Word. Okay, second person of the Blessed Trinity. For by beholding the Word, they know not merely the being of things as existing in the Word, but the being as possessed by the things themselves. God, by contemplating himself, sees that being which things have in their own nature. Okay, God has all things pre-existing in him. If therefore it be called evening knowledge, in so far as when the angels behold the Word, they know the being which things have in their proper nature, then the morning and the evening knowledge are essentially one and the same, and only differ as to the things known. Okay, that is a little bit confusing to me, but I think what we basically take from that is that in a sense, the morning and the evening knowledge of the angels is one. Okay. And again, it can be complicated, but again, hopefully you're learning a little bit each day and you're taking something with you that helps you the next day. And we're not going to get too bogged down if something's confusing, because you know what? If you enjoy this stuff, if you enjoy Thomistic philosophy, then praise God for that. All right. That's going to do it for question 58 of the Summa Theologia. And thank you for joining me as we study the Summa one question at a time. Thanks for the comments and everything, that the participation. It's great to hear what's on your mind. St. Thomas Aquinas, please pray for us. God bless you.